Constitution, that the Supreme Court is not the law of the land, which he said last year. He said the Supreme Court's not the law of the land. It's just a decision. He also said that if a person is arrested by the police, he is guilty. That's what he said. And everyone wants to say to him, apparently, except when you are investigating. He goes through investigation after investigation. I mean, it's just a disaster situation. I'm not a banner waver. I'm not in for prison reform and stuff like that. But those gross things that I just mentioned, boy, that our population in prison, the rate per 100,000 people, only countries in our league are South Africa and Russia. Those are the only countries.
He'll be a Democrat yet. I see it coming.
But think of that.
I believe.
I mean, Italy, Spain, Romania, South American countries, they don't have they don't have the same number of people in prison as the United States does. There are guys here in prison. Well, unless that's getting into it. I mean, some of it's just crazy. Some of it's just unbelievable. I did 3 years in Bastrop with a guy who did 3 years out of 4 for taking videos off the air and selling them. He did 3 years in federal prison for that. That doesn't sound like much until you've been in prison.
That sounds like a lot. I can't believe.
He's the only guy. Jack Valenti of the Motion Picture Association went after him personally, and they made an example of him. And the FBI told him, "You are the example." If he did 3 years, you know what he finally got convicted of? Misdemeanors.
Like how much money was involved when he did?
Oh, a lot, because he mass produced them and then sold them. So he made a lot.
What do we look at?
Oh, millions. Oh, he made millions. He made millions. I'm not gonna lightweight that. But the point is, in Europe, he would have somehow had to pay it back, or do something for the community.
Yeah.
That isn't what we do. They took everything he owned, okay, and it goes into the massive bureaucracy and feeds this bureaucracy that feeds itself. It feeds the Justice Department, basically. It doesn't go to help the hungry. They don't break up his farm in Southeast Texas and give the land to migrants. That isn't what they do.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the guy leaves prison 3 years later, now vicious and destitute, instead of having to pay back what he did wrong and doing something to help society.
He didn't even have the option of paying it back?
Oh, no. He offered. He said, "I will pay it back double. I will make his initial business was educational films. He sold thousands of educational films legitimately."
But that's crazy that they didn't take the money.
Of course it's crazy.
Because understandably, if somebody can't make restitution, then that's the next step. But if he's taking restitution.
There are people doing 1 and 2 and 3 years now on parole violations, and the parole violation is a traffic ticket. They're doing 1 year, 180 days, 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years, all the time since Ed Meese came in. They're bringing them, they've done their 7 out of 10 years on some crime. They paid their debt. They're on parole. Now, I agree, and I'm sure you do, there are rules they should follow. They should be normal citizens. Normal citizens don't go to jail for a year when they go through a stop sign. I mean, that's incredible. A guy will buy a new house, or a guy will open a bank account, comes back to prison. I mean, it's really gotten crazy. So
I saw a story in the paper today that might interest you about a man who is in prison for killing, and he's now just confessed to killing somebody else.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to see that.
And it's mysterious because the corpse that they found said that we just beat up some guy in an alley. He beat him to death, and he now feels so bad about it that he has to confess. But there's no record.
Yeah.
But the interesting part to me in relation to your case is just that somebody will confess so many years later.
Oh, it always happens. I think that this consciousness of guilt that I mentioned to you about Judge Dupree in his footnote, that's really what occurred with Greg Mitchell. I mean, I think Greg Mitchell's things are very clear consciousness of guilt statements. When he went into his friend's house in North Carolina, the day the FBI talked to him about my case and said, "I need money to leave the country because someday they're going to get me for this." Well, it's clear what the guy's talking about to me. I don't think there's any, Judge Dupree threw that all away as meaningless and irrelevant. No real focus on the MacDonald case or anything. And when Kathy Perry Williams said that she was involved in the killings of a doctor and his doctor's wife and their two kids on an army base in North Carolina, that wasn't good enough for Judge Dupree. She had to be sane and nice and a school teacher and say it was 26-year-old blonde Colette, or it wasn't any good.
How, if she was involved, what about Helena Stokely then?
Oh, I think Helena Stokely was there and is really clearly involved, and these are all her friends.
I see.
But Kathy Perry Williams is the person that Helena Stokely gave her bloody clothing and boots to Kathy Perry. Kathy Perry gave them to the lawyer in Fayetteville who gave them to the CID. CID then gave them back. Okay. Kathy Perry says she was there that night. Helena said several things. Helena said on different occasions she's given us different numbers, of people who were there that night. Ray Shedlick clearly believes, as did Ted Gunderson, there were at least 6 and probably more. And no, we don't know how many exactly were there, quite honestly. We even think that it might be more confusing than they've even let on, because we suspect some of the people stayed in the cars, the vehicles the whole time. Okay? And that's why we keep looking for more people. We'll eventually get Dwight Smith. He's the one male that I know was there, and that Helena knew was there, and that everyone else
Is he the black?
He's the black guy.
Yeah.
Right. We'll eventually somehow, some way, find this guy and find out if there's any consciousness of guilt there. Although we already know there is from the park in Fayetteville conversation that were overheard, where he and Helena and another white guy, but Dwight Smith, were discussing the killings. So we know that he's already had little bits of consciousness, and he's the one who told Helena not to put their business on the streets. Okay? But these things happen. It eventually comes out. Kathy Perry Williams didn't come to us. She went to the FBI. They held that from us until after, this is really weird. This is true. This is factual. They held it till after the TV showing of Fatal Vision, and then Murtaugh says in front of Dupree and in front of the Fourth Circuit that she only came forward after the TV movie. Do you follow that? She actually, the date on the confession that the FBI finally had to give us is prior to the movie. But they held it until after the movie, then gave it to us. Now Murtaugh has said in court openly that she confessed for a lust for publicity. I mean, that's how the whole case goes, and that's just another one of these things we always talk about. But I'm not sure of Kathy Perry's role, but she said 2 things that are so alarming to us that we believe she was there. One is that she knew about a rope burn on Colette's arm that has never been discussed anywhere by anyone. Never. Matter of fact, we didn't find it until after she confessed. Then we went back to the autopsies, and Noguchi says and showed us there's a line.
Yeah.
Where there's a rope-like burn on her arm.
It's very concerning.
That's right. She also said something that's even spookier, because I hate to even talk like this when I get sick, but she said that one of the kids was trying to hide in the closet. And in the reports, we find that there's a clump of hair in the closet torn out by the roots. Murtaugh says that's fine. What does he think I did? Tore hair out of my daughter, put it in the closet, wait 13 years, force Kathy Perry to admit her guilt, and then refer people back to something that I planted in the closet. Jeez. And Dupree threw it all out. Said it was the rantings of a lunatic. Sure, she's a lunatic. She kills people.
Where is this woman?
She's in Florida. She won't talk to us. She has a new husband. He goes to a psychiatrist. We talked to a psychiatrist, and he said he can't disclose anymore, but he indicated he wanted to. And Dupree sits up there with that grin. I can't describe it. You ought to see this man. a grin on his face, and he says, well, I don't know about y'all, but stuff like this doesn't happen in North Carolina. Maybe out there in San Francisco, Mr. Siegel, where y'all is. He says, this stuff doesn't happen in North Carolina. He says, LSD? I never heard of it.
He talks that way to Chris.
Absolutely. We'd sit there at trial over and over. Bernie Siegel, I don't remember the specific argument. It might have been psychiatric testimony, but we made many motions. We lost all 24. But the really brilliant ones were arguments on the admissibility of Colonel Rock's report and the admissibility of the psychiatric evidence and the inadmissibility of the fake pajama top theory. Those were the three key arguments that Bernie made, and he was brilliant. And the courtroom was packed with pro and con people. There wasn't, you could hear a pin drop in that. I mean, there was no, when he was done, Dupree would look at me and say, Mr. Siegel, he says, I have to tell you, in all my years, I've never heard an argument that was so well stated. He says, I'm very impressed. Motion denied. I mean, it was unbelievable. And you'd just be shattered, and Bernie would be shattered. And we have to prop him up and bring him back to the fraternity house that night and say, look, we got tomorrow. You know. Ralph Spritzer, when he argued he's a professor from University of Pennsylvania. He used to be third man in the Solicitor General's office. That's who argues the case for the government. And he became Bernie's consultant to the Fourth Circuit. And he argued in front of the Fourth Circuit, and they said, well, Mr. Spritzer, Moynihan was talking to him, and the other two people, I forgot who he said it to, but one of them said, this is all interesting, and it may be, germane, but we're bothered by the prosecution argument that these people were involved in drugs, and hence their testimony is unreliable. And Spritzer said the truth. He said, look, MacDonald can't figure the sailors. I didn't have the luxury. And yet I am, I'm paying a price for not having quality assailants. That is the craziest catch-22 I had ever heard. If I had somehow had assailants who were college graduates and weren't taking drugs, all would be fine. I mean, that is really, that's what I thought Joe McGinnis was saying. That's what he said he was saying. But Joe, didn't want the downside of fighting the government. I mean, he didn't say that to me. He didn't say it on trial, but that's clearly what happened. January 1983 is the watershed. Helena Stokely dies. No more mystery witness telling all these things about Ivory and the CID and the FBI coming to her saying, let sleeping dogs lie. So she's dead. Now she's out of the picture. Greg Mitchell dies 2 weeks after the FBI visits him. And the Supreme Court turns me down, and Joe says, now what? So he comes out with the anti-Jeff book, and I think, Dennis Eisman certainly agrees, I think Brian agrees, the climate is such, I don't know how Brian feels about that. We've talked about it several times. I'm never really sure of exactly how strong he feels on this issue, but I think that that book created a climate that allowed the Fourth Circuit to ignore the evidence. I mean, I can't get away from that. To me, that evidence is so clear. If you compare it to other cases, unless you have to be black and ethnic to win, the evidence is so compelling. When you look at other court cases that routinely get new trials, routinely, I'm not talking about anything unusual, routinely on one witness, one little tiny thing, one suppressed item of evidence, over and over. You see this guys leave here all the time. Now, I shouldn't tell you stories about all these guys in here, but there are guys across the hall from me that you wouldn't spend 1 second with. There is no question what they do for a living. They kill people. And yet one guy just got his case overturned. He freely admits to whoever asks who he kills. I don't even talk to these people, and they try to tell you they're bragging so hard. He just got a new trial. So, but all of that is boiled down to Ralph Spritzer, Professor Spritzer, who was my lawyer, working with Bernie at the Fourth Circuit, saying, but Your Honor, he didn't have the right or the moment to choose his own assailants. What you're asking for is impossible. I don't know how I get off on that.
Yeah. I must say, I'm very upset me, he said about the closet.
And that's incredible. It's all there.
Yeah.
It was really weird. The movie showed I was in Bastrop, and they did one of the few nice things they did to me. But they did a lot. They treated me fair at Bastrop, I must say that. But they came to me, and each dorm had 2 little 10-inch TVs, and whoever had, like there's 300 guys in the dorm, and maybe 30 of them get 100 every week on inspection of their cell. So those 30 names go into a hopper, and they pick it, and you get the 10-inch TV for your cell for a week. And then next week they have another drawing, another inspection. Well, they took one of the 2 inspection TVs and gave it to me that night and said, don't try to watch this in the TV room. So I watched that, and that incredible movie, and that whole scene occurred when the next day I found out Brian O'Neill was sitting here and seeing my name flash across the TV that I'd saved the inmate's life that same day. Are you aware of all that?
I told you I haven't seen that movie.
Yeah, no. The movie was on TV on a Sunday and Monday night. Sunday night, I had saved an inmate's life.
Oh, I don't know, but tell me about that.
Oh, it's really a strange story. And I had saved an inmate's life. I'll compress it and then go back to what you want on here. But an inmate had a cardiac arrest in my dorm. And some inmates ran up to me and said, come on down and help this guy. So I ran down to his room, and on the way, I'm yelling at these other guys, what's happened? And they said, well, all we know is he may have brought in some heroin to the prison.
You could get out of your cell to go to.
Yeah, the cells are open during the day, and on that level of prison, level 3s and 4s, the cells are open during the day.
Mm-hmm.
You walk on your own key. They double lock them, so you can't use it at night when you go. At there it was 9 o'clock at night. So at 7:30 that night, some guy comes running up to my cell and starts screaming, Doc, hurry up! This guy isn't breathing. So I run down to his cell, and he's dead. Has no heartbeat, and he's not breathing, and his mouth is filled with vomit. So I start clearing the vomit out of his mouth and tilt his head back, and I do mouth to mouth, and I start doing CPR, and I pull him off his bunk onto the floor, and I'm doing CPR and doing mouth to mouth. I'm doing one-person CPR, and I finally get another inmate to help me. So I showed him how to do the compression because he wouldn't do the breath because the guy's mouth is filled with vomit. So we started getting the pulse back, and the cops now were arriving because someone had hit the panic button. And they were all yelling, what's going on? And I said, the guy's heart stops. And he said, okay, keep doing it. And they all knew me, so they said, you keep doing what you're doing, Doc, and we'll just carry the stretcher. So 4 cops carried the stretcher, and I kept doing mouth to mouth, and another cop, a 5th cop who had a CPR class, took over for the inmate and kept doing closed chest, and we ran 300 yards to the little prison hospital. And we got there, and they had a PA who had no idea. I mean, she was fresh out of PA school. She didn't have the foggiest conception of what was going on. So I took her through this, and meanwhile, the assistant warden had arrived. He's only lived like 5 minutes in the prison, and he was there in the middle of the cardiac arrest, and the captain was there. And they're watching all this, and I'm not supposed to be treating patients, but I mean, no one else is going to treat them. And, I'm looking at them, and then they're not sending it. So I just kept treating them, and she kept saying, what next? And I said, now you got to give me this, this, and this. I said, now you got to push some Narcan, which is a drug that overcomes opiates, heroin, morphine, drugs like that. So she pushes some, and nothing happens. And the captain's ears perked up because he knew what this medication was. And he says, why are you giving that? I said, to see if he's overdosed. And so we gave him a couple more doses, and he started breathing on his own. So we got an ambulance, got paramedics. I instructed him on everything to do. We gave him extra doses of this special drug. They didn't have them on their kits. And the ambulance ride was 40 minutes, and they wouldn't let me go, security risk. So the paramedics took over, but they had clear instructions and they had 2 ampules of this drug. And halfway there, 20 minutes later, he stopped breathing again. They gave him the drug and he started breathing and he was fine. They eventually charged him with importation of heroin on a federal reservation. He got 10 more years, but he's alive and well. He's a decent, funny, good old boy. He's a Texan, and he's now in El Reno, Oklahoma. And I hear from him third hand. Guys come through and say, "Hey, are you the doc?" I say, "Yeah." And they say, "Well, we know this guy." He says hi and thanks for saving his life and all that crap. So this went on that it actually happened Saturday night, not Sunday night, which is really weird. Well, some inmate must have called UPI. I hadn't said a word. The warden said to me, "Look, best thing to do now is be cool." He says, "We've seen you for a year. We know you don't cause trouble, but this is the kind of thing that can cut both ways. So it's better if you just stay cool." I said, "I understand completely." So I didn't say a word. The papers come in the next, Monday, but Sunday night, Brian O'Neill is sitting home with his wife and they're watching Fatal Vision. He's taking notes for the possible lawsuit later on. And they're halfway through the movie. It was going from 8 to 10:30 or 8 to 11 that night. And at 9 o'clock, there's a bulletin. Dr. MacDonald saves life in Bastrop in Texas while watching Fatal Vision. Brian says, he tells a funny story. Apparently, they looked at each other and said, "Well, that's part of the movie." And so the next 15 minutes go by and there's another blurb. See film at 11, ex Green Beret, Fatal Vision doctor saves life. Brian says, "This is really weird." And they waited for the news, and the first story, number one, at 11:01, the story comes out. Reports today from UPI in Texas indicate, and they make it sound like it was right during the movie. In fact, it was 24 hours early. So I'm sitting in Texas, unaware of all this, except that I had saved this guy's life the night before. And they call me into the captain's office at 7 a.m. Monday morning saying, "Who released the information?" I said, "What are you guys talking about?" And they said, "Well, it was all over the news." I said, "You guys tape record the calls. Go listen to all the calls." And so apparently they did, and they never came back to me again. Then Joe McGinnis comes on a civil deposition a year later in the case where I filed a suit against him, the same deposition I told you about. And one of his questions is, he had information that I had arranged this guy's overdose to save his life, it's in the deposition, to save his life, to get publicity in the case.
I've had a look at that deposition at times.
There's 2 depositions. Make sure you read both of them because, I may be confusing times, but
Yeah, I looked at them last time I was here, and the thing I was struck with is how in the first deposition he talked a lot, and then the second one he clammed up.
that's Joe's.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm referring now to when they deposed me. Okay.
Oh, and this was then asked him.
Joe's lawyer. My question always to Gary was, how does Joe's lawyer even get data on stuff like this? There's something really screwy going on in the background. There were a couple other issues. I had been assaulted, like when I lost his tooth and stuff. I don't even know the guy who assaulted me. He was typical prison. It had nothing to do with anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? They immediately locked this guy down and sent him to Leavenworth and asked me, "You're not going to sue, right?" I said, "No, I'm not going to sue." It was just a prison thing. It probably was over in 5 seconds. I, unfortunately, was unconscious. This great big guy punched me. No one knows why. Okay, so the conspiracists on the team think that someone was trying to get me. And I say, "Look, it's just prison. Some big guy who's stupid, and he was really a dumb thug. He was brand new on the compound. I get treated real well by the inmates because I'm a doctor. But
that would be a very good thing in your defense. I mean, you may get unconscious more easily than most people. I mean, the fact
I've certainly been knocked unconscious a couple times. Yeah, I know.
Because that would explain why you were unconscious.
Yeah. I never thought of that exactly that way. Yeah.
I mean, some people faint points.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Some people get knocked out. You can tell it in boxers. It doesn't mean they're punched on. I mean, there are people who a blow to their head does knock them unconscious. You're right. That is true. I never really neurological defense. I know what you're saying, Mac. But my only point here was,
because the question is always raised, why were there so few abrasions and wounds on you when you say you're unconscious? And this would answer to if one little blow by this guy also knocked you unconscious, or was it very
Oh, he
serious?
punched me once.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the witnesses who talked to the captain and lieutenant and whose reports I have seen because of the civil suit, believe me or not, that's the only reason I've seen it, because of the civil suit. And how Joe's lawyers got a hold of this stuff, that's really weird when you think about it. How are they involved in internal prison stuff like this? It's crazy. But anyway, um, the witnesses who saw this said that this guy walked up to me, said a few words. I said no or something like that and kept walking. And this guy was about 240 pounds and about 6'1" or 6'2", a big blocky guy. And apparently you're me and I'm him. You're walking that way. And he threw a left hook as hard as he could with me just walking like this. And he hit me here. And I went up in the air and came down and landed on my head. And, you know, he said, I matter of fact, they were afraid. He said they thought that I had broken my neck. Because when I hit, my body was above my head. You know, and my head went over on my shoulder. I was already unconscious in midair, in other words. I was like a limp doll when I hit the floor. And they were afraid that I had severed my spinal cord. So they dragged me into my room, which is where I awakened. And they sent this kid off to, he's just a thug, just a typical prison thug, a 22-year-old kid, probably been arrested 50 times already. It was like his first week in Bastrop, didn't know who I was, didn't know that a whole bunch of other guys would jump on him quick because they take care of the doc. It's really, you know, so he was gone like within 3 days to Leavenworth. But I started getting asking questions by McGinnis's lawyer about setting this up. I mean, it really is wacky. The whole thing is crazy. First of all, I don't know how McGinnis even knew about this assault. He had to know it from someone in prison or the administration. And that's really strange.
Well, I thought you set up the thing about saving the guy's life.
That also.
Yeah.
That also.
That story, that's an example of what we were sort of talking about. The writers tend to, you know, change facts to suit their wishes.
Right.
I mean, it would have been so nice if it had happened while you were watching television.
Right.
So this guy just said you did, right?
Right. Exactly. So
pretty.
Yeah, exactly. So I got I was calling Brian for routine normal work that Monday, and he's telling me this incredible story about it being the #1 story on the LA thing. And then the warden called me over to his office and said, look, they have been deluged with phone calls. Would I issue a statement? So I said, what do you think? He said, you ought to give a clean little statement and let me approve it so no one in the prison system gets upset, you know, because you're trying to go back to Long Beach and let's do it nice and clean. Don't claim heroism. I said, I'm a doctor. I didn't do anything I don't do for a living. It's nothing to me. I mean, I just helped the guy. The guy was dead. And I did what I normally do, and I'm very good at it. I didn't claim anything to anyone. He said, I know that, but write it that way. So I wrote out a paragraph, and they released it. 6 hours later, they withdrew it and issued another release saying, MacDonald did nothing that the prison guards don't normally do. I looked at the warden the next day, and he got red, and Larry Taylor is the assistant warden's name. Larry Taylor. He's called Disco Larry. He's a good-looking guy who wears nice clothes, which is unusual in administrators, and they call him Disco Larry. And I looked at him the next day. I said, what was that shabby trick all about? And he said, I can't make any comments. He said, orders came down that the first press release was to be pulled and a release was to be issued that you had nothing to do with anything that the guards don't normally do. I said, fine. And I walked away. But that's the true background. And then I get questioned by McGinnis's lawyers years later that I had set something up for publicity purposes. It's really bizarre how this thing all turns around. But it's not a major point. It's just one of these little things in the background that when it happened, Gary looked at me and I looked at Gary and where does this come from? Gary hadn't even heard about the incident. So I told him all about the incident. He said, this is crazy. How did they get to these things? I said, I don't know. You know, same way with the tooth. And, you know, there's a couple other episodes. I was a referee in a basketball game. There's 10 black guys playing basketball and I'm a white referee. The guy didn't like the call. He punched me. That's all that happened. They asked me during Joe's civil deposition, did I pay this guy to punch me? And I said, where are you guys going? Are you guys serious?
This was Cornstein.
No, this is Joe's prior lawyers before he had to fire him because he thought he didn't have coverage from an insurance company. No, the
Yeah.
insurance company backed out,
Yeah.
so they weren't paying for a fraud defense.
And he sued him,
And
yeah.
he sued him and got that coverage back. So that was on Melvin and Myers is the name of the firm in Los Angeles, which is a very powerful firm, very good firm. And the lawyer was Bob Vanderet, and he's a good lawyer. Okay. We were very shocked. And I said to Gary, I said, this guy is a real, I won't tell you what I said, but I said, this guy is not what I thought Bob Vanderet from Melvin and Myers would be. He said, he just does what the client wants. I said, Gary, there's a limit. I mean, if he says jump in the cesspool head first, does Vanderet jump in the cesspool head first?
He thought he was playing really dirty cool, no?
We spent hours. Where do you read it? We spent hours on, did I have sex with my lawyers? Male lawyers. I looked at him. This is when McGinnis was laughing. And that's when Gary got so angry for the first time in the case. When we left that day.
Was Kornstein better then, or did he not depose you?
Kornstein never deposed me.
I see.
Kornstein never did. What made me put Kornstein in that class was when he did this thing about the child abuse, and then Kassab went out and held a news conference. Now Kassab might have done it on his own. He is a little reckless. But that team was very tight. They spent every break in the same room. You know what I mean? It wasn't like Kassab was off by himself.
Yeah.
He was totally involved in that civil law. He sat there day after day, and every break he was right up with McGinnis, and they were right in the witness room together. You know, this wasn't a thing where Freddie was a crazed fiend running out holding his own news conferences. So
yeah.
I think that Kornstein trying to put that in is really disreputable because he knew there was no evidence for that. I mean, basically, he had to. This theory of that me falling asleep watching Laughing with Kim is evidence for child abuse is really a pretty far-fetched theory, which Judge Ray immediately seized on and said that's about as far-fetched as I've ever heard.
Yeah.
He said that's not evidence in a court of law. He said that is sheer, I don't know if he said fakery, but he said something.
Yeah.
You know, and he said I'm not going to allow it. And they tried again. And then Judge Ray really got angry. He said, look, he said, you haven't been listening. He said, this is not going to happen in my courtroom. This kind of stuff doesn't come in. You know, you have met none of the criteria of normal evidence. So something is like this does not get in this courtroom. So with Dupree, you can rest assured that would have been in.
I know.
So, yeah, that thing with Kathy Perry Williams, when we first got it, even I said to Brian, you got to use this very, very carefully. I'm telling you the truth now. I mean, this is really the flat out, I'm really laying it out. I said, you got to use this very, very cautiously because it is to lay people not understanding these people and what happened and kind of drugs they were on and their lifestyle and all the stuff they were doing. Kathy Perry is the one who stabbed her boyfriend and stabbed the cats and stuff, stabbed her boyfriend's dog to death and left it on the table and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this was the lifestyle. This isn't just an isolated event. That's the whole point. I mean, and that's all in the CID records. We got none of that on our own. That's all from the CID file they withheld from us. I mean, they knew this in 1971. We don't know about 70, but 71 on, they knew all this. All of that. She comes out of psychiatric therapy in 1983, and the day before, fortunately, at some point in time, I think it'll be important, the day before Fatal Vision, she goes to the FBI and confesses. But when Brian Murtaugh takes that confession and finally hands it to us begrudgingly, and then uses it in court, he says the confession was after the movie.
But can you prove it with people?
Yeah, it's dated by the FBI man who took the interview.
Yeah.
It was Friday.
Yeah.
The movie was Sunday and Monday. It was that same weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really weird. And Ray Shedlick went down to Florida immediately, as soon as we heard about this, to try to re-interview. And she had been told, and her husband told us. The FBI said, under no circumstances should you submit to an interview by the defense because they'll just keep harassing you. You're worse that effect. We never got to her. We have never spoken to her since. We've talked to her psychiatrist who wants to talk to us but can't, based on his ethics. You know, we had the same problem with Helena Stokely, but we eventually got information from her psychologist Okay, because she eventually, believe it or not, signed a form. Ted Gunderson got her to sign a form.
A release.
Yeah, psychologist.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we went and talked to her, and she verified that Helena had made. It wasn't anything that was new to us. It was nothing. She thought it was earth shatter, and she was really felt on edge about giving it out. But once Helena okayed it, it actually ended up being very similar, and no additional information than prior admissions of guilt. There was no new information, nothing like that at all. It was just another person saying it. But that's never come out. We never used that because there's no really way to use it once all the witnesses were turned down by Dupree. So uh, so the Kathy Perry Williams stuff was very bothersome because of two things. One is she says the kids were boys. Okay, and so Murtaugh cackled like crazy. I'm telling you the truth. I'm using that word. That's what he did. He cackled in court. He was in front of Judge Dupree, and he had free reign in front of Dupree, and he laughed. And he said, "See, this is the kind of thing. She says they were little boys." Well, many people told me Chris was a little boy. Chris had short blonde hair and was tough. I mean, she was a little tomboy. She was only 2, but she was blocky, and she would run out and defend Kim with the neighbors' kids.
Yeah.
So with Chris, there's no. I mean, that's totally understand. Kimberly was a little girl. I mean, you couldn't miss that. She had long brown hair, and she was a little girl. But I'll be damned if a deranged killer on drugs is supposed to know that to say it. Jesus. I mean, she's in bed sleeping. Oh. So, what was Kathy Perry Williams supposed to do? Take down her underwear so she could testify years later? The whole thing is nuts. Oh, and the other thing that was wrong in Murtaugh's words is that she said there was a flight of stairs in the house. Okay, now that's bothersome, but there were stairs in the house, which is exactly where the struggle occurred. And I've never taken LSD, but everyone who has laughs when they read that. And they say, well, that's exactly the kind of problem you have on LSD. You're going up the stairs and you're going up one step and there's like 13 ahead of you and they're endless. And they laugh when they tell me this. I mean, the kids who use this stuff in the late 60s and 70s who are now normal adults, not crazed. They said that is very typical. It wouldn't be unusual at all for a person using a mixture of drugs, but including mescaline and LSD for sure, to have that sort of a memory that there was a flight of stairs. Even if there weren't any stairs, but the fact that there were stairs right where the struggle was occurring, if she had been in the house, for that person 13 years later to say there was a flight of stairs would not be alarming. But those two things are the things that basically, and Judge Dupree, of course, agreed 100% with Brian Murtaugh. Said it's the rantings of a lunatic. And how does he explain the hair? We didn't even know about the burn on Colette's arm. I mean, we had studied those autopsy reports and never, in other words, it just never, it's weird. You read it 4 or 5 times and it never hit. What does that mean? There's a little burn like abrasion on the arm. All of a sudden, 13 years later, this wacko tells us why. Oh,
You know that Tolstoy story, God sees the truth but waits?
no, but the line is great.
Line sort of tells the story. It's about a man who was unjustly convicted of a murder and sent to Siberia, and he spent his life there. And then, sort of, toward the end of his life, he's sitting with another convict, and the convict tells him about this crime that he committed.
I think I read that.
Uh,
That sounds awfully familiar. Oh, no, maybe I'm confusing it with Solzhenitsyn. I read some Solzhenitsyn one time and was never the same.
Did you read the third circle, I think? Or circle, I think. Let's begin.
I don't even remember. I
For
don't.
the cat boy.
Right. I read the Cancer Ward and Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
I forget, but I read a couple of his things and I was very, very, never the same.
Yeah. Great hiding.
Well, they're certainly dying off. I got to do something soon. you know. Mitchell's gone. Stokely's gone. Kathy Perry Williams is in psychotherapy on chemotherapy, which is exactly, you know when her first breakdown was? The week after.
What is she taking? What kind of drugs?
We don't know. All we really know is that the week after February 17th, she had a psychotic break.
And she was a local person there?
Yeah, she's a fan. She's a friend of Helen Stokely's. She's the one who carried that bloody clothing and boots to the friend. Um, and she split roughly 10 days after the 17th of February and went to Florida. And when she got to Florida, she was so psychotic that her parents put her in a psychiatric hospital. And for the next couple of years, she got Thorazine and Stelazine and stuff like that, the antipsychotic medication of the time. You know, not some of the stuff they're using now, but basically the Thorazine route. That's what we know for sure. And then she's been out, she's working, she's remarried, she's married. But she has these little psychotic thought processes now and then, and she apparently kept evidencing growing, basically admissions of guilt to her new husband. Her new husband tells her, look, this is crazy. Why don't you just go get rid of this, unburden this? Go and tell the authorities. So she does. They tell her to let sleeping dogs lie and tell the husband that the defense, if they ever get a hold of this, is going to drive him crazy. Okay? And they basically lead the husband to the view that once the defense finds this out, your life is never going to be the same. You're going to be hounded by crazed Jews from Philadelphia and investigators who were rogue FBI agents. Okay? And the husband now, when Ray goes to, I think it was Ray, it could have been Ted, but I think it was Ray, tries to see him, the door's closed. We're not going to talk to you. We have been told by the prosecutor in the case not to discuss this. There it sits.
What caused her to confess to the FBI? Just
Her own,
guilt.
yes, and her own, apparently she was having a cycle where she was supposedly getting better in psychotherapy. Now I'm going to tell you something that we're reading between the lines, and then I'll get back to the facts as we know them. Reading between the lines, it's pretty clear her therapist was saying, look, you got to unburden some of this.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I heard of another case where this was a well-known case, maybe you heard about it. It was called the Champagne murders. It was these two guys who killed the parents of one of them. They were these young men.
This is different than the Billionaire Boys Club thing.
But very similar, except 30 years earlier. This was in the 50s.
I don't
Probably
remember
you were
that.
too young for that. But they committed a perfect crime.
Okay.
The parents just were found dead having drunk a champagne cocktail, and it looked like suicide.
Okay.
And then one of the guys just couldn't resist boasting about having committed a perfect crime to a girlfriend who told her psychiatrist.
Huh.
And then the psychiatrist persuaded her to go to the authorities.
To release the information.
Yeah. He couldn't, but she did.
Huh? And the one witness.
Yeah.
I rest my case. Unbelievable. There's a guy I'm sure you're aware of this case. There's a case in Connecticut which is very famous because it's been in and out of the courts for these many years, roughly paralleling my years. It's called the Gold case. And the guy is now crazy. The accused.
That's crazy to say. Yeah.
Now he's crazy. Now he's in an asylum. He has been convicted and won his appeals, and the facts are that the judge in the initial case didn't let in the admissions of guilt from one of the people who were involved. And the Connecticut Supreme Court said, look, you have to let in stuff like that. It's exculpatory. He then was convicted a second time. He won the second appeal. It got worse. some of the evidence began to seem like it was being planted. The investigators on the case were New York City cops who came into Connecticut, and with the help of a Connecticut state trooper, some evidence disappeared and other evidence reappeared every time a case came up. Stuff kept disappearing and other stuff, more damaging, kept appearing. And the old stuff that was exculpatory no longer was available. Louis Nizer eventually took the case over and won an appeal. And the state said they were taking him to trial for a third time, at which time, the guy. Well, anyway, I don't know if he's nuts or not, but he's in an asylum. And the judge said he's not going to let a third trial take place until the guy is pronounced fit. And he apparently is unable to be pronounced fit. Now, he may be guilty, he may be innocent, I don't know. But that is the case in one of Joe McGinnis's letters, back and forth, that you'll see as you read the letters, where he says, isn't this enclosed case something? Joe McGinnis is the one who sent me all the stuff on the gold case.
Mm-hmm.
The implication being, without it being stated in the letter, this is exactly like your case. And just one of his little games he was playing, one of his sick little things. But he sent me all the clippings on the gold case and said in the letter, isn't this amazing how similar this is to your case? It was at a time when he had just gotten his second trial ordered. Okay, and we were waiting for word on one of our, I don't even know which court hearing anymore, but one of the court hearings that everyone thought we were going to win. Here's McGinnis sending me the clippings saying, just hold on a little bit longer and look at this guy in Connecticut. He just got his second trial ordered, and, aren't the facts, he says in the letter something like, aren't the facts amazingly similar? There was a girl involved as one of the assailants. There were a couple of men. It's really weird. And there was, I can't remember the details. It was weird, but there was evidence strangely disappearing late in the case and suddenly reappearing, and it was reversed. And it was real. The police appeared to be framing this guy Gold.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I said to you in my letter about our forensic expert, Dick Fox, who has a theory. And he's published papers and he's spoken at national meetings, and he says the cops always think they're framing the guilty. And that's how they rationalize in their own mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're framing someone who's guilty, it's okay. And I mean, I worked in emergency rooms for many years and was good friends with many cops. I know exactly, as soon as he said it, I knew Dick Fox knew exactly what was going on in life, because I've heard those guys hundreds of times talk like that. It's okay to do it because we know he's done other crimes. Okay? They frame the guilty. And that's what Dick says happened in this case after he reviewed the evidence. Yeah, it's terrific, He says it ought to be the title in the book. They only frame the guilty. And we all laugh and say, yeah, well, we hope so. But, he's one of those guys that hates to get to points like where I just reached with you. He'd rather that he and I just discuss forensic stuff coolly and calmly. And when it gets a little too heavy, we don't hear from him for a couple of weeks. And,
I guess that's how he does to do that kind
exactly.
of work, right?
And I think, like Donna, for instance, is basically my liaison with Dick Fox. It'd be interesting to talk about Dick Fox with Donna, because she knows of what I am speaking, and she might give you a whole different view, but it'd be interesting to hear what she had to say about that. But Dick Fox is a real bright criminologist who used to run a lab that he created in Kansas City for the FBI, and now is a consulting criminologist, and said it's the only way he can face himself. He can't run a police lab anymore because times have changed. He said in the 70s, some labs could get away with neutral work. He says, you can't do it anymore. He says, the way it's set up now with the current Justice Department, you work for the police. And so if you're not a consulting freelancer, you are publishing police data. You are not publishing forensic data. There's a big difference. One takes the data and sees where it leads. The other takes the suspect the police have arrested and takes the data and fits it to him, which is what Ivory did to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what Dick Fox came up with in my case after he spent a long time reviewing it. And he knows Noguchi real well, and he knows John Tone. He knows all these guys have a closed circle. It's several hundred men and women, but all over the country, and they all know one another. It's kind of interesting sometimes to hear the war stories. because they'll read a case in the paper and they'll say, let's see, John Smith. Oh yeah, Chicago. He's a little weak on blood, but he's good on guns, or whatever. Yeah, yeah. But he was very knowledgeable, I believe, about Tanai, for instance. And he's very knowledgeable about Raskin, a polygraph. Brian O'Neill found Raskin, and I said, look, we've got to get a good guy. And Brian O'Neill said he's the best. And then when Dick Fox came on board, I asked him, how did Brian's ear shot? And he says, yeah, he's one of these heavyweights. He's one of the top 3 or 4. I said, what did he tell you? I said, well, he told me he's number 1. He said, they all think they're number 1. But Raskin is in the top 5 in everyone's book, including the governor. So, and Raskin had told me he does State Department, CIA, CID, Secret Service, and FBI internal investigation polygraphs. He says, so they will be very frightened when I make my announcement. They know my quality. And boy, if that wasn't the truth, Brian Murtaugh went crazy when he heard that we had the polygraph done by David Raskin. Okay? They started backpedaling so quick about polygraphs. They didn't want to talk polygraphs ever again. It was now a dead issue. And now when a reporter goes to Brian Murtaugh, now he says, polygraphs aren't admissible. We don't discuss those things. They're not admissible in court. Boy.
I sort of one thing getting back to your the lawsuit with McGinnis.
Uh-huh.
Gary Bostic said that he felt he had a case when a really good case when we got the letters, the McGinnis's
Yes.
letters to you. Were you aware of that yourself from the beginning, or how did that?
I think so, but I'm not sure I stated it quite that clearly. By the time, see, in putting it in time, the book came out. Brian O'Neill was my criminal defense attorney, and it was almost 9 months before we got Gary on board.
Yeah.
So I had already been defending myself endlessly to the media, to everyone, to the defense team, friends, family, foes, people who write letters. I had been through the mill on the book, okay? So I was sort of hardened by the time Gary came on. So it's hard for me to exactly place my feelings, but I was so sure in my own mind that McGinnis had hung himself. To me, it was very clear. But I'm not sure that I ever really communicated that to Gary because I was struck that he did what I forgot exactly how he termed it, but there was some pseudo-legal term. He had to look over the whole thing before he decided to accept it.
Yeah.
It was like a case review.
Yeah.
And several weeks later, he came back to me and he based it on the letters.
Yeah.
And from that point on, he felt solid. Once he had really looked over a lot of documents, looked over some briefs, read some things, and then read the letters, he came back and wrote me his seminal document. And it was much more detailed than Donna's, and it was different style. Not more detailed, it was different. But he was saying, this is where we can go with this and why. And it was focusing on the letters. And he was saying the proof rests in the letters that fortunately you saved.
Do you usually save letters?
No, I don't. I saved a few letters from old friends, a lot of letters from my sister, who's, wish she had been a writer and should have been a writer, and her letters are brilliant. But so I always save those. They're always special to me. And I saved Joe McGinnis's, and I'm not sure why I saved them. I had a folder in my little filing cabinet at home, and it said Joe McGinnis. And every time I wrote me a letter, I just threw a letter, and I'm never sure why. We're missing a lot, by the way. That's what's funny. I wasn't positive of that until we were in the middle of the civil case, and things would keep coming back, and all of a sudden I'd say, that's right. There was another letter, prior to this one, and then you'd study the letters real carefully, and you can see the whole. You can actually even see references sometimes. And so there are several letters that I know are for sure missing, and probably 10 or 15.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Both ways, okay? But several real holes in McGinnis's letters to me that when I got them, I just did my normal thing with letters and threw them away. But for some reason, I saved the majority. The one that always pleased me, there can be any pleasing in this thing, and I really didn't think there could be till the settlement happened. But the one that pleased me was the one I crossed out, because that was such an anger-producing letter and was so depressing to make the tape and expose my own intimacies with Colette, to a third person, which I'm not a talker. I've never sat in a bar and had a couple beers and talked to a guy about a girl. I've never done that in my entire life. McGinnis is the only person who ever heard some of those intimacies. And then he published them. Well, that's another, we've talked about that
See,
10 times.
that interests me because
Oh,
I think that what somebody writes about another person is it's a two-way thing, and each as you said, everybody kind of writes about themselves as well as what they're writing about. Isn't the interaction itself going to elicit different material? And weren't you saying things to McGinnis because of who he was, because of his character, because of what he was interested in, and what you thought he was like?
right.
I
tried to do
you were
that.
sort of creating yourself
Right.
in relation to him, no?
Right, exactly. And in response to questions. If you look at his letters, some of his letters are nothing but a list of questions for the next series of tapes.
Yeah.
And in the next 5 or 6 tapes, we're covering what is in what is a document that shows all this. It's in those same documents. I mean, it says tapes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are a product of letters dated, and I give 3 dates of 3 letters from Joe to me. And then when you go back then and look at the letter, you can see the tape has the answer to all those questions in all those 3 letters. That's what happened. There was always a series, but it was not the same as a normal interaction with this give and take.
No, but just in the give and take of your relationship with McGinnis, I mean, we're all a little bit different with everybody.
Right.
And so the person you were presenting to him was connected with who you thought he was, right?
Yes.
Well, you're presenting a different person to Jeffrey Elliott now,
yes.
or to me. To
Yes,
everybody,
that's true.
right?
That is true. I'm not sure exactly I know what you're saying, but I'm not sure that by my saying yes that we're saying the same thing. What I'm saying is those tapes to me reflect portions of Jeff MacDonald. It's not by themselves a totally accurate picture, especially because they are specific answers to specific questions. It isn't really free form.
Well, I would say that those tapes are something very special case anyway, just because of that monologue form.
Right.
So
Right.
so abnormal. And
Right.
But I think what you chose to take from it, say,
Well, that's why
based on what your whole, I mean, he seemed to have seen you as this very sort of superficial and
yeah, but that isn't what came across. In other words, what Joe was saying to me was very different than that. In other words, what I said to him, look, the key thing here is the difference between a Colonel Rock and a Judge Dupree. Joe would agree. We'd have a long conversation about that. If that's not in the book, then we'd have another conversation, and it would be about the psychiatric testimony. He knew all about Bresson. He knows the phoniness of all. He knows the deviousness and the evilness. His letters to me proving. In 1983, his letters very clearly are saying, you must be amazed to find out what happened with Dr. Brussels in reality, as opposed to what everyone thought was going on. Such material must be agonizing to you. None of that's in the book. Okay? But at that time, that letter to me meant Joe, the editor / author, was taking all of this stuff and putting the important points in the book. That isn't what he did. What he did was he edited the tapes and took anything he could change or warp or by itself with no surrounding data makes me look superficial, chauvinistic, nasty, whatever. All those negative things that I don't think are me, but is open to question. Okay?
What I'm getting at is, were you perhaps, because of maybe things in his character, showing him these sort of lighter sides of yourself that you wouldn't put into such prominence with another person who was more serious, the way we all adjust to the other person. So if he's a superficial person himself, if he's somebody. Well,
it certainly seemed to me that was his interests, number one, and number two, it was his questions, and number three, his conversations to me at trial had been about how if his life had ever been investigated, he'd be in Leavenworth. That's what he said to me. He said it to me. We came out of one day when they had been, I think, cross-examining me. We had heard that the girl in the book, known as Penny Wells, whose real name is a different name, Carol Larson, but I appreciate not using that. I just heard her for no reason. The Penny Wells in the book was in town, being held secretly as a surprise witness by the prosecution. So we went and interviewed her. Mike Malley or not Dennis Eisman, but Wade Smith or someone came to me that afternoon and said, she's really a nice person. Then what'd you expect? She's a decent person. You know, this government theory of her being important in the background is nonsense. Joe was there for all of that. I missed something again. I got off. Yeah, I must be getting tired because I just
Yeah, we've
slipped.
been talking a long time.
You would ask
I
me
was
something.
suggesting it just that
Oh, I'm sorry. So Joe, that night we were having drinks together, and Joe is saying, "Well, now we know Carol's okay. How about the secretary out at Montauk Point?" I said, "Actually, she was the same kind of person. She's a nice person. She wasn't Einstein, but she was a real nice person, tall, good-looking redhead. That episode happened." And he said, "Man," he says, "can't imagine being prosecuted for extramarital sex." He said, "I'd be in Leavenworth." And we laughed and had a drink.
well, he said that in one of his letters too.
Yeah.
Just trying to elicit this
He
stuff.
lists seven or six cities that he's had affairs in while he's married.
Yeah.
He says Vietnam, Spokane, Seattle, Miami, New York. And he says, God, if they ever got to me on that or something like that. But
No.
that was his whole tone of conversation over several days at trial. So when he was asking me in tapes, and I was calling him saying, Joe, I don't know, but this is nuts. This is not the point of the book. He kept saying, it's background. So I know you, and I know everything bad and everything good. I said, okay, but this is not the point of the book, Joe. And he said, I know that. The point of the book is a false conviction. He said, Ivory, Shaw, and Grebner. He said, false prosecution. He said, sending a prosecutor on federal government time to your hospital to try to get you fired. That's what the book's about. I said, okay, I'm making up a tape.
In other words,
I'm not sure I'm answering.
It isn't simply that you were kind of responding. You were really fighting against things.
Oh, I was definitely fighting at time. Now, the other times, I made it much more easily, quite honestly. I mean, you get into it, you'd make a tape, and then you'd feel this sense of relief that that's gone off, and then there was this 5 more things, so you'd quickly make another tape and get it out of the way. Okay? But I never wanted to do that, and I certainly never wanted to do the personal things. There were 2 things that were extremely difficult. Well, 3 things to be extremely difficult to talk about. One was that night, February 17th, but we did that several times, and he had heard me testify in person, so we didn't have to always keep going over it, I thought. The second thing was intimacies with Colette and I. And actually, it was just equally as tough to really, because I guess of my personality, to really talk about Kim and Christy real easy with him, especially into a tape, as opposed to him and me sitting together having a meal and gradually getting into something where I feel okay about him, hearing these things, my feelings about my kids. But I did that at his request. And you'll notice in the letters, come on, you got to get going. I need the tapes. Come on, more. I need more. Come on, send me some more. You haven't told me enough about Colette. You told me superficial, So there was always this in the back, and there was a lot more on the phone, by the way. So there was that. And the third thing was, I told you February 17th, the kids, and I guess intimacies with Colette. I'm just not a person who ever talked about that. I mean, people like Steve Shea and Dudley Warner, my 2 best friends, we have never.
Yeah.
Dudley Warner and I have been friends, best friends, since sophomore year in high school. Now, I'd have to do a quick addition, but that's at least 30 years. We have never discussed how someone is in bed or something. That is not me. It's not Dudley. It's not Steve Shea. That is not my lifestyle. He has portrayed me in that book in 700 pages as exactly that.
Right.
That is exactly what he has done. He has turned the entire core person 180 degrees from the person.
Well, I guess the sort of the most sort of strict reply to Yulia there would be still, why did you give him that
I
stuff?
know. And the answer is, and it's not even an excuse anymore because I'm so ashamed that I did, is that he wanted it, and I thought he was writing the book, and he kept saying he was writing the book that would get the truth out, and he needed the background, and I was willing to pay this price. I mean, look at the one letter where he says very clearly, after you say it this once, it's over. The worst is over. You'll never have to face headlines. That's like a therapist. I mean, that is going back to your early analogy. That is exactly what that tape was like then at that point. Reading that and thinking it through and saying, okay, I'll bite the bullet.
Yeah.
I'll get it out. Here's when Colette and I made love for the first time. Here's how we were on the couch at Washington Square Apartments. Here's what happened at the racetrack. I don't remember the date. Then he says I lied because I didn't know the date.
Yeah.
You know, all those things are true. Those are questions that he asked me. I didn't bring those up.
Yeah.
That's what's so weird about the change. It's the same way with Mildred, how she treated the kids. The change is so phenomenal over time. But Joe asked the questions. For instance, the racetrack episode, the letter is very clear. It says, Diane Purkis told me this crazy story from when you were in college having dinner with her and her husband and Colette and you. The four of you were drinking wine, and they asked you, did you ever make love in any weird places? And you and Colette laughed and said, yeah, we did at a softball game one time and another time at the racetrack. That's how the whole topic came up. That wasn't Jeff making a tape for Joe and saying, hey, Joe, by the way, I balled Colette every night, and boy, we did it in crazy places. Man, am I a stud. That is not the spirit or the intent or the meaning. It's exactly the opposite of that. He dragged this stuff out of me with his specific questions and then turned it around in the book and said, here's this callous, superficial, chauvinistic, nasty human being talking about the woman he says he loves.
Right. That's the way.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, well, here I sit. And what is my defense? When the AMA News comes and says, Joe McGinnis has written this incredibly powerful book, what do you have to say? Jeez. He doesn't, I don't get 16 hours.
I suppose there is this, the journalist has the kind of authority so that when the question is asked, there is this automatic feeling that you have to answer it, right?
Especially once you make a deal with him.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I said, okay, let's go ahead and do the book. That's a given. We're now working on a project.
So you were collaborating. And
we were collaborating.
Yeah, yeah.
So what Joe is asking, and the sort of the unspoken thing is, and I said it once to you before, but let me just say it again because I think it's so important. Once people set ground rules, you then don't keep saying those ground rules. That's what's so weird to argue it now, because it would be like if you go to work every morning at 8 o'clock and your work day is 8 to 5 and you come to work every morning at 8 to 5. Your boss doesn't say to you on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of the 17th year, by the way, come to work at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Joe McGinnis had already set up the ground rules. I knew and he knew why the tapes were being made. It was background. So he could take a thinking process and all the bad and all the good that could ever be found out about this guy and create the truth out of this horrible misprosecution. Now, once we had set those ground rules, I think it's really, I don't know exactly the term, but I think it's asking an extraordinary amount that I am supposed to renegotiate those terms of that information that's being transferred every week.
Yeah, but you could say, well, this is none of your business.
Yeah, you're right. I know. I kick myself badly for that. I do. I don't.
Well, I don't want to have this kind of stuff in the book.
But I did say that.
Mm-hmm.
I did say, and he said it's not going to be in the book. It's for my eyes only. This is background. That's why those tapes are that way. That's important. That's a critical issue. That isn't once. That's in January of 80. It's in June of 80. It's in 1981. And there were many more phone calls in between all of those where that exact topic came up. The last sequence of tapes that's made, the last ones, I have to look at even the dates now, so I don't want to
But if you had that on tape, then you would have just had the tape. If you
Well, I
had
have it in his letters. It's in his writing.
that this will only be for that I will
Absolutely.
not use this in my book.
He doesn't say the words, I'm not going to use this in my book. His letter, see, his letter is a response to my phone call.
Yeah.
That's what you have to understand. There were always three things. My letters to him, his letters to me, and phone calls. Now that letter is in response to my phone call saying, I'm not going to do this. This is not the right thing to do. It's not for the book. He writes back and says it's for my ears only, as I said on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the whole.
Yeah.
Now, then the next day when I make another tape, am I supposed to call him and say, look, this is crazy. This is not going to be in the book? That isn't a normal human interaction, I don't think.
Right.
In other words, I had made a decision. Catastrophic, it turns out, but I had made a decision. Joe had integrity. Everything flows from that. From that flowed Bernie and I not paying enough attention to the contract, although the contract is still pretty clear, still holds up pretty well, even though it's not the best contract in the world for me. The actual written words are actually pretty clear.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not great. I would not do it that way again. But it's not nearly as bad as you would think when you hear people talking superficially. When you go read the contract, there's two things exchanged: my life story and money. My life story is to be told without a reckless disregard for the truth. That's all that's in those contracts. That's all that's in there. There's nothing about tapes. There's nothing about time. There's nothing about pre and post trial. There's nothing else in those written contracts. I fulfilled my criteria. Joe didn't. In either of them, he didn't pay me, and he didn't write my life story without there was a clear reckless disregard for the truth.
But you're using language that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's the full First Amendment language.
Yeah, but I mean this whole thing about the maintaining the essential integrity of your life. Okay.
When I talked to Bernie Siegel on Friday, I do watching to ask him about that.
Oh, that's critical.
Don't forget. He got that
Janet, now don't. Well, okay, that's a good question. I don't know, but I'll bet you it was because he was in the same frame I was in. This guy was reputable. He had a reputation. We thought it was decent. He appeared great to us, and he was certainly our best friend. And he signed a work agreement. I mean, he signed a work agreement. Joe laughs it off as though it's nothing. That is not a nothing document. It's very clear what that document says. Joe was working with the defense, not around the defense, observing the defense. He was part of us. He sat in on every meeting. He was asked opinions, believe it or not. I mean, it's 7 weeks of that. That's like a cauldron, and you're really like made or you go up in smoke. And I mean, he was one of us after a couple days, literally.
Well, I already see such a contradiction in his wanting to write an independent book
and signing on.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, you can't have it both ways.
That's exactly right. And he now laughs it off as a nothing thing, even in his testimony. He said, I never thought of it. Didn't make any difference. It didn't mean anything. Blah, blah, blah. That's a sign. Mike looked at me and said, okay, now I'll talk to him. Bernie Siegel said he's not sitting in conferences unless he's part of us, working with us, and we can have a free flow of information without any fear that this is going to be misused later on. I said, how are you going to do that? He says he's going to become part of the team. He says that way there's attorney-client privilege, and anything he does, I have to see and you have to see. It's all there. Joe just ignored it.
Yeah.
And said sue me, basically. Later.
Well, you thought that you had to put it in its most drastic form, and you had kind of a fault writer in that sense. You paid him for his the $10 for being part of the defense team.
Right.
The way you hire other people.
Right.
You hire Gary Bostwick.
Right. And he signed it.
Right, but he didn't consider himself somebody working for you. He saw himself as working for himself.
Right.
Which
except he lived off of me.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, he didn't spend a penny. 7 weeks, lived on me.
That looks very bad for him. That kind of.
I mean, it's unbelievable. We paid we bought his laundry.
Yeah, I saw that.
Gee. Then he goes and lives in my house. Not long, but I mean, I'm talking about psychologically. They get a motel room. He sleeps in the bed in my house. He drinks my wine. He goes in my wine closet, selects the bottle for dinner. That's not the mark of this neutral, this guy.
Well, this is why it's very hard to see it as a typical First Amendment
Right.
case.
It isn't a First Amendment case.
Yeah.
I mean, he says it is. Kornstein says it is. Wamba and Buckley back it. It clearly isn't. None of those people answer any of the routine questions. Number one, have you read the letters from McGinnis to MacDonald? No, they haven't read them. What's your source of data? Fatal Vision and Joe McGinnis. Number three, are you aware that there was money that didn't change hands that was supposed to have changed hands? No, I'm unaware of that. Their opinion means nothing. Then they say it's a free speech issue based on the First Amendment. We say, wait a minute. How about the money? How about the contract? How about the essential integrity? How about the 4 years of letters? And they say, well, guy's a writer. I mean, I can't recall whether it was Wamba or Buckley, but one of them kept referring to the book as a work greater than the author and the subject.
Living that Wamba, yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
But Joanne kept passing me notes. Is this guy for real? Gee.
It still seems to me that there are two separate issues here. One is the issue of a writer's conduct,
Right.
right? How
Okay.
he should be made, whether he takes money from the subject he's supposed to be independent from and all that, and writes in letters that are untrue.
Right.
And I would class that all as conduct having nothing to do with what the book is. And then there's the problem that you
Okay.
have with his book. Fine.
Greetings.
Interrupt you, but
It's time for me to go. Huh?
now I'm asking you to wrap up.
Okay. About 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
3 more minutes?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
And then this other area that we've gotten into about his characterization of you, his not writing about you as a physician, only writing about you as his playboy, all that.
Not writing the truth.
But that is separate from this other thing, don't you think?
But the two issues are intimately connected because both are fraudulent. His conduct was fraudulent, and his writing is false. So they're intimately. I
But
mean,
you can imagine a book that is false, say, that
And the
book
conduct
where the
was true.
conduct is impeccable.
but who would have had him in your house? I wouldn't have had him in my house. I wouldn't have had him. I wouldn't have had Sherry cook him scallops and fish.
But how did that then contribute to the book or to the falsity of the book or the what?
Well, for one, I continued to make tapes, which he then
Yeah.
didn't. Do you know that the tapes in the book are not the tapes as they were made? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many levels to this thing.
Yeah.
There is nothing true about the whole thing. The relationship was false.
I see.
That false relationship allowed cooperation. Does he use the cooperation for? Okay, say he's a con man. There's a lot of writers who are con people, but they write the truth. Did Joe con me and still write a true book? No, he conned me and he wrote a false book.
But exactly, aren't you suggesting, if somebody is a con artist, then they're not going to write the truth?
That's what I think. I think that Joe's central core is this, so for whatever reason, sort of an inability to really go to the truth of things and work out his own psychological problems. If he has homosexual panics, he throws them on a subject in his book. If he is, if he's had extramarital sex, then the subject of the book, who's also had extramarital sex, is this horrendous person. I mean, to me now, way too late. The psychological mechanism is so clear. His writing is clear projection.
Yeah.
When I read that interview with him in the Philadelphia newspaper or the Washington newspaper, I think the Philadelphia World, he talks about the dreams he had all through the 70s of naming his kids.
Yeah.
There's the answer. Joe is projecting his fears, his own psychological problems. I don't even begrudge him his own psychological problems, but don't throw them on me.
Yeah.
That's not right. Then to say it's a nonfiction book about Jeffrey MacDonald. I mean, that is such a ring of falsities. The mouth is feeding on the tail constantly, and it's growing bigger and bigger. Every step of the way was false. Everything. The guy is a monument to lies. His lifestyle, his writings, his letters, his contracts, his dealings with his own publishing, every single thing about the guy is false. He doesn't, and he says it. He doesn't hold any contracts to be sacred. He's a writer. Well, sure, other people have to worry about contracts for their house and but writers don't do that. He says that under oath. That's in his statements. He said, but no one does that. We called Jeff Elling. He says he's crazy. A lot of people do
Oh,
that.
you're talking about how about getting books in on time.
No, that was one thing, but we went over many. Gary pinned him down on all kinds of contracts. Joe didn't believe negotiations. Joe really didn't believe anything was valid as long as Joe was part of it. In other words, whatever he said to me could be invalid. Whatever he told me about the releases could be invalid. Whatever he said to Sterling Lord could be invalid. Whatever he said to Dell and Delacourt could be invalid because he could go to Putnam's because writers always do that. Okay. Now, the cleverness of Joe is there's always a tiny grain of truth. It's like the paranoid schizophrenic. He's not paranoid schizophrenic. I'm not saying that. But that person can develop a scenario, and until you realize the underpinnings are all false, you're really fooled for a long time. That's Joe McGinnis. Joe McGinnis lives everything false. His writings are false, but he certainly is a con man and misrepresents himself and what he's going to do. Then he misrepresents you and your feelings. Then he misrepresents his questions. Then he misrepresents how he's going to handle the answers. Then he changed the answers. He changed them. He says things that are different. He takes portions from one tape, puts in with portions of another tape, and when you read it now, it says something different.
Yeah.
To fight that in a sense is almost like fighting this massive pillow you're getting smothered, and you push this part away, and then this part there's nothing true to any of it. And his defense was he's a writer, and he calls in Buckley and Lombard. He said, "We agree, he's a writer. He can do whatever he wants." I don't think he can do that. I wished I had the resources to go back to trial. I wish we could have done that, because I think eventually he would have lost, but a second mistrial would have been catastrophic to me,
Yeah.
Financially and emotionally, and my mom's illness and stuff. We couldn't, so we settled. The settlement at $325 speaks loud and clear. You don't pay someone $325,000, a third of $1 million, because he's filed a lawsuit against you. You pay him $10,000 to get him out of court.
Well, it's like,
Hate
I
to
gotta
end it.
get
Yeah.
out of here.
That's the But on our witnesses and the psychiatrist in town sitting there waiting, Judge Dupree says no. And Bernie says, "What do you mean no?" He underwent the interview, and Judge Dupree said, "Well, Dr. Brussel is in opposition to the other 5. Therefore, I can foresee a battle of the experts, and I don't want the jury to be confused by a battle of the experts." So I am denied 5 legitimate exams through a total fraud. The guy was almost 80, senile, and had a stroke, didn't even know where he was, and he's reading a list of questions from Brian Murtaugh for 25 minutes. And that takes away 5 forensic psychiatric exams. And Brian Murtaugh, when asked at the sidebar conference in this thing as to why I have to do this again, he says, because our experts tell us that something malfunctioned on his Rorschach test. He didn't give enough answers. And I'm looking at this thinking, holy good night. I mean, all you had to do, Bernie, was come back and say to me, "Jeff, what does that mean?" And I'll say, "Bernie, that's just crazy. He's making something up. You better talk to the psychiatrist who's waiting on you and get a better answer." But you either answer the Rorschach test or you don't. The prosecutor can't say he didn't like the answers.
Yeah.
I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's all in that record.
Yeah.
And I just read it for the first time 2 weeks ago. But it tells me, my whole point of all that was what we were facing in Raleigh, North Carolina. We lost the case. Bernie made 2 bad errors. His closing argument was awful, and his jury selection thing, I think, was a fake. I think he was bamboozled.
Black Amnesty March.
Okay, by the man who did it for $18,000. Okay, And it was a current thing then. It was a hot ticket in those days to do these jury selection polls. But Bernie is a good lawyer. He's very smart. He fought very hard. And in almost any normal circumstance, normal being any city in which the judge had a reasonable, um, reasonably neutral view on the case, the conviction never would have been obtained. Never. And when you see this stuff that I'm just referring to, you'll get a flavor
Yeah.
of what we were up against. We were up against an odds. The odds were very, I don't even know if jury selection in a closing argument would have changed anything. When you see stuff like this in the background, this was predetermined. I mean, this guy went out of his way to win the case for the prosecutor. This isn't even the prosecutor arguing. That's what's so hilarious in a sixth sense. As you're reading these notes, you're saying, Dupree's doing the arguing, not Murtaugh. And he's saying, well, government people have so much trouble, and he's in town only for one day, and the planes don't fly, and blah, 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 you got to do it tonight. And I can remember sitting there when they came back and told me, I said, I ain't doing it tonight. I said, don't you guys see a setup? And he said, look, Jeff, it may be a setup, but we have 5 good ones in the wings, and the 2 heavyweights, Sadoff and Halleck, will blow any of these turkeys out of the water. But we didn't realize the extent of the setup,
Yeah. I talked to Sadoff
Oh,
on the
good,
phone,
good.
like a very sensible.
Very
there.
sensible,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And that's why what Joe manipulated that stuff into in the middle of the book, that whole segment on grand jury testimony is really shameful. It really is shameful because Joe doesn't indicate, even has his own witnesses testify to, the psychiatrist Stone didn't understand that was grand jury testimony. He thought that was trial testimony in front of a jury.
Yeah.
That's in his testimony. So Joe, his defense was, well, that was grand jury, clearly identified. Yeah, if you really know the case absolutely cold and you use a magnifying glass, you can realize 20 pages into this long digression that this is all grand jury testimony based on hypothetical questions. Okay, that's very different than testimony or opinions in a case.
Right.
Okay, so and then even Joe, when he was on the stand, would then even get worse. He then said, oh, yes, I investigated his psyche. I talked to his own psychiatrist, implying that it was bad for me. So we called Sadoff, and it turned out he was good
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sadoff's a very bright guy. Sadoff's not a god.
Ready to go, sir? I missed this stuff. Okay, let's run for
Sadoff or Halleck, I told you this once before, I don't want to waste your time, but these are guys, you don't pay these guys $1,000 and get an opinion your way. These people are a step above that class of
Yeah.
hired testifiers,
Yeah.
which clearly Samanow was, at least, if not Stone, although I think Stone was also, quite frankly. But these men have a reputation that's absolutely, you can't blemish these people. There's no way. The government knew that. That's why they had to be kept off the stand. You can't tear apart their style of examination of me, their curriculum vitae, their record of testifying for both prosecution and defense, and their honesty. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
You don't go to these guys and give them $2,000 and come up with an opinion that doesn't have legitimate basis for it. Witness a Samanow. So they had to keep these people out of court. So that's what we were faced with. But we were faced with not just the prosecutor arguing skillfully, which he did do, but we were faced with a judge who was arguing for the prosecutor. So Bernie, Bernie can defend himself, but I love Bernie, but he can defend himself. But the truth is, I'm not sure we ever had a chance. Once Dupree was the judge.
Are you all going to be staying throughout the count?
We have to make a decision right about now, or because the next time you can leave is about 4:30. It's now 3:17.
Would that be all right with you?
It's fine with me.
Great.
Yeah, stay as long as you like.
Thanks.
Remember, no more change though.
Uh-huh.
No more snacks.
Right.
She spent all her change. I told her bring one out she about 20. There's no change in her for 20.
She's a big spender from New York.
Oh yeah. But next time bring him the money so you can buy him snacks.
He's a nice guy. He's a little unusual for Hobbs. He's a nice guy. But
It's
he's,
unusual for him to be so jovial.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's, the other officers consider him real flighty. I think he's just a real nice guy with a lot of naivete.
Yeah.
I like him. You know, he's a very pleasant guy, and he's one of the few people who treats visitors humanely. The others think they have to play a role all the time. Tough, you know.
Mhm.
Some do, some don't, but the majority do, and most of them are young and scared, and you know, so they play a little tougher to cover that up. This guy just cruises through life, and
Yeah.
you know, he treats everyone okay.
You sort of wonder who the people are who end up being jailers.
Oh, I know now. I mean, I do know. I worked in the office for a year here at Terminal Island, 79 to 80, that 1 year before I won my second appeal. I was the clerk in charge of their training. I had all their records. I had all their social security numbers, addresses, and stuff like that. And that's all been changed now, system-wide, basically, but specifically here, because some of the inmates who had those kind of things abuse them. Obviously, anyone would have. I mean, no inmate should ever have had that kind of access, but I wasn't about to misuse it. I just went ahead and did my job. But it was very eye-opening to have their resumes. Most of them flunked 3 or 4 police exams routinely. Routinely, they have a strange service record. In other words, service 2 years when they're drafted, 3-year volunteers, and some of them are 4 years, like Marines are 4 years. And the guys will have like 5.5 years of duty. And they have an honorable discharge, but there's no information as to 5.5 years. That means they were forced out for something. They weren't cutting the mustard. You know, it's not a normal time for an ETS.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I constantly see that. Newport Police Department failed exam. Long Beach Police Department failed exam. LA County Sheriff's failed exam. 1 year with Hacienda Heights Police discharge. You know, over and over and over again. A lot of them have GEDs. The equivalency exam for high school, take it at home. Instead of having a high school diploma from school, they have a GED. That was my first real exposure to them. The inmates go through that all the time. A lot of the inmates have to be brought up to high school level. There's now a new federal thing where they're trying to make sure that every inmate can read and write, which is very good. The next step should be like Europe has been doing for 50 years, get people out on work release. Okay? But the Americans can't get to that.
Yeah.
You know, we're still with South Africa and Russia. You know, lock them everyone up and throw the key away. And of course, with Meese and Reagan, it's gotten the sentences have more than doubled.
Really? I didn't.
Oh yeah, yeah. November 1st, sentences more than doubled. The people who were doing 3 to 7 years, 3 to 10 years in that range, the common bank robber and drugs. Those two things. That's the 50% or more of the people here are bank robbers or drugs, and the usual is 3 to 10 year range. Starting November 1st, small users, the people that used to be like misdemeanors or ignored, or if they were punished, they got a year, they're getting 10 years and they have to do 7. And the people with any money involved, there's a money criteria now. You know who determines what the drug is worth is the agent who arrests you. And so, I mean, I'm sure you read the newspaper and know that when they say the biggest drug arrest in the history of New York and the biggest drug arrest in the history of Brooklyn, it happens once a week. The DEA and federal agents, every time they arrest someone, it's the biggest haul in the history of crime. Well, those guys are all facing doing 17 on a 20. They get 20, the judge has no discretion, and he does 17. The federal system, since I've been in it, has gone from 25,000 people to 50,000, and in the next 3 years, it's going to 100,000 because of Reagan and Meese with that new law. 100,000. Double what has doubled in the last 2 years. There's 47 federal prisons. Everyone is to the absolute max. There isn't a single open bed in the system, and they're doubling in 2 years.
Well, that's what at least I need. That's a law and order ticket, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.